Every day, a tiny country, slightly smaller than the state of New Jersey, makes international headlines. Many are negative because this powerful country is often at the center of the security and stability of one of the world's most volatile regions, the Middle East. A few years ago, I had the privilege of visiting this extraordinarily complex and often misunderstood nation, the state of Israel. And recently, our producer, Jeff Coleman, went to see for himself to do a deep dive on some of the security concerns and political realities that shape the region's only true democracy. Tonight, we'll try to clear up some of what we understand and get wrong about the world's only Jewish state. Stay with us. As some of you know, our great producer, Jeff Coleman, grew up on the mission field in Southeast Asia and spent summers in Africa and South America. But he never traveled to Israel. That's until he was asked recently to join a small delegation of political leaders to see firsthand what makes Israel such a difficult and complex challenge for many to understand. Jeff and those traveling with him were given a rare top-to-bottom tour of Israel's security, political, and cultural landscape. I asked him to share some of what he's learned and, more importantly, what he's planning to do with what he knows, what he now knows. Jeff, give us some background on your trip. Why'd you go?
Well, I think I told you off air. Israel was not necessarily on the top of my list, not because I wasn't.
Not on your bucket list? I mean, if
it wasn't.
Things had to do
it wasn't. And really, I think it was because I always thought of Israel as being a place I would never really fully understand. And so it was intimidating. It wasn't like you could go and visit and then you've cracked the code and you understand a people group, or you understand the historical complexities, or you get the politics of it. How does the country run? There was really no way for me to crack it. I didn't want the kind of Christian Disneyland version of Israel. I wanted to have an experience that was guided by experts. And so when this opportunity came along, I took it. There were 12 of us, American political leaders from around the country, some people who lead state parties, some who were in consulting, others who were elected officials or former elected officials.
Democrats and Republicans?
This was a Republican-only trip. The Democrats went the next week. I mean, that's unfortunately, even on issues like this, the way that facts are presented, or what the interests are of Republicans and Democrats, to build a trip that will get the people on the bus, it's even divided there. But so the impetus was an invitation. I said yes, and then went for a little over a week, but it felt like a month. Really, it felt that long because schedule was something like 8 in the morning
Jam-packed.
to about midnight. And then I kind of added another layer from about 4 a.m., 5 a.m. to when our programming started, to explore myself, because I really wanted to meet people who were unscheduled and not announced and not on the agenda.
So the hard thing for most people, if they're blessed to be able to go visit, is this is where Jesus was. I mean, this is where it happened.
Yes.
This is where Jesus ministered. This is where he was crucified and rose from the dead. So there's that spiritual reality,
right.
And you're actually right there in the Holy Land where it all took place. And then there's the political reality of 2022. I mean, and how does that reconcile? I mean, are all Jews religious?
Yeah.
Do any Jews believe Jesus?
That's great. Well, first, the Jesus walked here part is interesting because for centuries you've had people coming to Israel and staking a claim down and setting up shop. So, you famously have Constantine's mother, Emperor Constantine's mother, coming in and identifying to the best of her understanding what religious sites were. Here's where Jesus died, where he was crucified, and then kind of based on the cultural tradition of whatever sect or denomination comes along, there is a challenging site. So there's the Garden Tomb versus the Church of the Holy Sepulchre versus these other sites. So there is a bit of a tug of war. That's, for me, what was difficult to kind of understand. Here's one cool thing, a quick aside. They took us down into tunnels that are underneath a mixed Arab and Jewish community outside of the historic Old City walls. So
are these new tunnels, or
these are tunnels that go back? Well, it's a new tunnel. Remember, when you're looking at Israel, you're looking at a history in layers.
Yeah.
So they've gotten down to the layer of 2,000 years ago.
Wow.
And they were able to discover the pool of Siloam, famous from the Bible, which, you think of a pool, you think maybe it's the size of our desk here.
Yeah.
The reality is it's about 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools. And in 3 or 4 years, people will be able to visit and see the pool of Siloam. But something called the pilgrimage road from the pool at the bottom of the hill going up to the temple walls, up to the steps of the temple. Now the walls we see, most of them are from, I guess, around 800 AD. So the Ottoman Empire forward, that's what we see for the most part. Some of it remains from other eras, Herod's wall and all that. But this road, we went down into this tunnel, and the gentleman who was showing us, the excavation site, said, "Look, you can go all over Jerusalem, the Via Dolorosa, these other sites, and ask, is this an actual historic site where Jesus would have been?"
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But he said, the road that you're standing on now, and it's a beautifully, perfectly preserved road, taken out of the mountainside, and there's people living still above this road.
Yeah.
Still living above the road, because there's no eminent domain.
Right.
So you can't just bulldoze and dig.
Right.
You have to do your dig underneath people's homes. And undisturbed, beautiful road with a drainage system, with beautiful berms on the side, perfectly laid out, giant stones, like the size of a big, decent road, that it would have carried pilgrims coming from the Pool of Siloam up forward into the temple for major. He said there's a 100% certainty.
Wow, that Jesus walked that road?
Jesus walked.
Wow.
But above the tunnel that we were at is a community that represents a lot of complexities. In places like East Jerusalem, depending on what side of what line and what years, you're on this side of the Green Line, you're on this side of the British Mandate or the UN lines, or you're walking through complexity and people's personal histories.
Right.
People who have names, people who have houses and businesses that have had to change hands depending on what was happening politically above. That tension on the ground is palpable. So you can get in the tour bus and you can go from site to site, and you'll see some beautiful things and you'll encounter some people. But the complexity really comes in when you're going into communities.
Yeah, and you meet the people.
And answer your question about whether or not it's a secular and or a religious society. We were there on Shabbat, and the Jewish day of rest. And in the morning, we were in Jerusalem. Streets were quiet. People going to synagogue. People walking. Not a lot of traffic. Restrictions certainly on activity, and there's an elevator in your hotel room that reminds you it's automatically stopping at floors, so people don't have to use the buttons. That evening we were in Tel Aviv, along the beach side. Lively, loud, music blaring, a big party, Miami.
Yeah, like any resort town.
Like any resort town. And these two worlds live side by side. Now, where this gets complex to some degree is things like military service. Everyone in Israel.
Who does that? Who does military service?
Every young man and young woman, 18 years of age, does a couple of years of service, and depending on
Is there a distinction between a Palestinian young man and woman and an Israeli?
Yeah, they are not serving. They are not serving. So if you're living in the West Bank or living in Gaza, you're not serving in the Israeli Defense Forces. But if you are an Israeli citizen,
you're not. If you're living in the West Bank, if you're living in any of the Palestinian areas, you're not an Israeli citizen?
If you are not an Israeli citizen. So there would be some, I think there are some distinctions that would allow you to be an Israeli citizen and live certainly in the Palestinian-controlled areas, or the areas that are controlled by the Palestinian Authority. But the vast majority, as I understand it, of people there don't. But the tension comes in because there's an exemption for people who are Orthodox, and they don't have to serve. There are other, there's a subset of the population, religiously observant Jews who...
Hasidic Jews?
Hasidic, yeah, the Hasidic Jews. Those who are working in, they're going to school, they're going to yeshiva, studying the Torah. They are essentially praying for the country. There was this kind of idea, you've got the fighters and you've got the prayers in some way. But that population is growing. The population of Israelis who are not serving. Orthodox families are large, big, 8, 9, 10, 11 kids. Upwards. And the average Israeli family who is perhaps not from the Orthodox community, 2, 3 kids.
Right. And
so they're serving, but there's an exemption. So there's a cultural tension here. But here's what it also does, though. I think when you have that many people, 60-some% serving in the military, I walked away from that experience thinking, of my 4 kids, I hope at least a couple of them decide for military service, because what I saw come out of that are things like innovation. Israel is such an innovative, forward-thinking young country, and I think a lot of it has to do with the discipline and the focus and the sense of mission and purpose that comes from being in this tiny little country, and you have nowhere else to go. This is your home. This is the state that you have to defend.
And the countries that surround it?
The countries that surround it, I think one of the interesting things when you're looking at that map, it kind of feels like the distance between Jordan or Egypt or Yemen or Dubai, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq. You're talking about drives, afternoon drives.
Right. You went to the Golan Heights?
Up on the border, the Golan Heights,
right.
And West Bank, went to all these areas, and you think, wait a second, you're in an area there. If you read the newspaper, where yesterday or the day before or 2 weeks before, rockets were flying, or a bus was attacked, or the level of terrorism is up significantly. So we're looking at all these situations through American eyes and sometimes just simplifying it. We're looking at the story of the Palestinians, which is tragic. I think everyone recognizes that the security walls and the security barriers just cut it's an ugly scar on the landscape. There's no other way to describe it. When you're up looking down on the city of Bethlehem, for example, historic to the Christian faith, and seeing a wall and a fence line and barbed wire go through, but realizing that same wall, because now it is going into the earth, the walls now go deep into the earth to prevent the tunnels, the terrorist tunnels that were. So you have a reduction, they say, at about 90% of the of terrorist acts. A few years ago there were the famous, the bus bombings and
the Scud missiles and
all of that.
Right.
So, but the individual acts of terrorism now have been dramatically reduced. But the trade-off, very practical. Your kids, depending on what side of the wall you're on, don't get to see the beach.
Right.
Or you don't get to see family, friends, or you don't get to see people who
Did you go to the beach? Did you go? Well, there's Tel Aviv, of course.
Tel Aviv saw the beach.
But how about the other side? How about on the Dead Sea? Did you go to that side? Did you go to Masada?
We did go to Masada and the Dead Sea. I mean, the Dead Sea, of course, is contracting significantly because of how they're solving water problems and irrigation problems. But the area that's preserved is stunning. Masada. I know we're jumping all over here, but Masada is one of those places that I think you have to go. If you want to see the pyramids, you have to see Masada.
All those people died there on top of this mountain.
Correct.
That's flat on the top, and it's a fort on the top of the mountain.
The palaces. Herod had these palaces, elaborate palaces. I mean, one of the things you have to do, I think, when you go to a place of ancient antiquity, is you have to close your eyes and imagine to some degree. But you have to imagine not just the big historical events. I think what was so good, we had a wonderful guy named Uri Feinberg, who was originally from New Jersey and then immigrated with his family when he was very young, I think 10 years old, to Israel. And he's a scholar. And so he was able to help us understand that when you were talking about these world events, dates and numbers and architectural features, and you're asking all of these questions, or talking about the 6-Day War, or talking about the fight for independence, or don't think of these things in terms of military movements. Don't think. A powerful moment we had with Uri was at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum, and he said, "Please don't think of this as 6 million Jews. This is 1 and 1 and 1 and 1."
Yeah.
And there was a display of shoes in a acrylic or glass area, just like our desk here. And it dominates one of the large rooms.
And who did the shoes belong to?
Well, victims of the Holocaust. And he said, "I watched some of you walk around it. I watched some of you stop, kind of freeze, not know what to do." He said, but the reason that it's designed this way, unlike maybe the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., is because you're looking in, and he said, your mind goes to a single shoe. Because you're beginning to think, I wonder if this one would fit me. I wonder if that one would fit me. Or I wonder who that belonged to whom that belonged to. And then you begin to personalize, and you begin to think of tragedy this way. We have wars happening all over the world today. It's so difficult to understand what their life is like. What Israel has done is they've decided that anybody who comes to visit the Jewish state is going to get the story of the country, its birth. It's going to get some of the sense of the mistakes it's made along the way. It's also, though, you're also going to come out with a sense that this is not America. This is not.
People think it's just like this is a little American state in the middle of the Middle East.
Not at all. I mean, their attitudes toward. They have nationalized health care, for example. That would be a debate that we would have here, and people who supported nationalized health care would be considered socialists or communists.
Right.
The national leaders really don't debate domestic issues. There are multiple elections over the past 4 or 5 years in Israel. What is the issue? The issue is security. It's survival. When you have a country like Iran saying Israel is the one-bomb state, one bomb wipes it all away. How do you think like this? How do you go to the grocery store or school or synagogue or church with this kind of a threat?
You can't be thinking to yourself, oh well, this summer I'm going to go to the shore, or I can't wait for the baseball game.
That's
I can't
right.
wait for the Eagles to play.
Correct.
I mean, you might. They live with the reality every day that somebody might drop a bomb on them and obliterate.
Correct. You do. Yeah, you live with that, and then you also live with this tension. And I think there is a tension that hovers over it. Because, look, the people who are Israeli citizens do have mixed heritage. There's a lot of, at least I think it's 50% of citizens of Israel have Arabic roots. Because they come from all of the countries, all over the Middle East.
The Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jewish people, is there any kind of a separation in terms of how they relate to each other? I mean, is there any kind of an ethnic divide there?
Well, it was interesting. When we were arriving from Tel Aviv going into Jerusalem, there was and I don't know what the lead up to a holiday was, but it just happened to be that at 10, 11 o'clock at night, there were families, Orthodox families, all over. The communities out late at night, partying, having fun. That was a different. You could tell there were different people at different times who are celebrating in different ways. So it's a culture that lives side by side. And when you go into the old markets, the shuk, and you hop on a bus and all that, you do see people living very different lives, but they live in a respectful and a cooperative way. Where the tension seems to come in is on issues like military service or issues of your views.
Like who has to serve? In other words.
Sure, but the divide between, say, traditional conservative people, or people that believe in kind of traditional families who are church attending and all that, and people who are young, progressive, liberal in their thinking, the divide erases when it comes to the issue of security. So elections in Israel really seem to me, because it's a coalition, very complex riddle, a coalition government, and how you get to the X number that you need to be to achieve a majority coalition in the Knesset and then be prime minister.
Right. The Knesset is their Congress.
Knesset is their Congress, right? And so the unifying issue is security. How do we survive? And what are the existential threats that would destroy us? We don't, in America, there's a big divide between us and the theoretical notion that one of our enemies could destroy us. This is a very literal everyday.
When we return, I'll ask Jeff to talk about what's happening on the other side of the wall, the security wall that separates Palestinian-controlled communities from Israelis. Is there hope for peace in the Middle East, or is this a permanent reality for that region? Stay with us.
You're watching Joe Watkins' State of Independence on Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Share your comments about today's program in the comment box at joewatkins.org.
Well, tonight we're getting a first-hand report from our great producer, Jeff Coleman, from his recent trip to the State of Israel. Jeff, when many hear the word Israel, they immediately think about Palestine. What kind of exposure did you have to the other side of that long and protracted argument?
So the organizers of our trip, AEIF, AIEF, American Israeli Educational Foundation, which is the education arm of AIPAC, I was very pleased that they gave us exposure to Palestinian thought, head of a Palestinian think tank, someone who's dealing with these issues. And you think of, the way that the direction that has been established because of the relationship with the American presidents in terms of trying to broker a peace deal. The last time there was a major, peace deal, Yasser Arafat really got everything that he wanted, and at the end walked away. I mean, he had at least 90% of what he had asked for in terms of trading land.
This is with Jimmy
for
Carter.
Peace. No, this is more recent. I mean, this is the more recent iteration under President Clinton. And so you have Palestinians who have a leader who has not been on the ballot in 20-some years. So you have a young population, very young population. Many of them have not been privileged to vote, to choose their leaders. You have the foreign actors, especially Iran and Lebanon and others, who are playing in that sandbox and fomenting tensions. And then you have this, I can't overstate that young people are so frustrated with their inability to have basic services like electricity be reliable, which the Palestinian Authority is responsible for, or trash pickup, or jobs and opportunity. The jobs are on the Israeli side of it, and the permits are limited because of the number of security concerns. So
the blessing of you going there to Israel is that you have a perspective that a lot of people don't have. You've been an elected official. You've served a community. You represented a district in Pennsylvania. You know what it means to actually be an elected leader. And so you understand, you can look at these issues through the lens of somebody who's already been elected to serve and help people in a district. That's enormously helpful. What about for Christian viewers everywhere, American Christian viewers who say, you know what, I read the Bible, I read the Old and the New Testament, I know about prophecy, I have my understanding. I read Hal Lindsey's book, The Late Great Planet Earth, or some other wonderful book that talks about prophecy and the return of Christ, and for a lot of us in America who never get there or who aren't faced daily with the challenge of, you know what, tomorrow one of these countries that hates us could blow us up. For us, it's like, well, you know, hang in there. You ought to be following Jesus. And, you know, he's on his way back.
Right.
Although we don't know what day, whether or not it's this year or next year or next century, we don't know at a time that only the Father knows. But given your travel, how was all that impacted? How does that, what do you think now after having been there and you have your sense of, you know, maybe prophetic Bible, you know, Bible prophecy? What do you think now after having been there and seeing firsthand the reality and meeting the people and seeing how few people, I mean, how many people there believe Jesus? I mean, this is where Jesus was, where he walked. They didn't believe him when he was there. And now he's been gone for 2,000 years. And what is the attitude toward him there?
So this is a great question I think you raise, which is, so if you don't believe the claims of Jesus as the Messiah, you're still waiting for the Messiah. And there is, I asked Uri, one of, I said outside the window of what we were driving in, I said, there's a picture of, it looked like a rabbi. I said, who is he? And he's a dead rabbi that many people believe is the Messiah, or will be the Messiah, and he will come back. And I didn't get into all the details of the thinking, but his picture is all over Israel. And I asked him, I said, is there a sense of urgency if the Messiah is coming back? Does that actually change the way that you or Israelis think in their daily lives, if that is the claim that you're leading up to? Remember, there's no real denial of the historical Jesus, that the historical Jesus existed. Nobody in Israel is saying Jesus didn't exist. It's just, did he complete the prophecies? And I did try to find out, so why don't you think Jesus was the Messiah? And it's because there was a sense that there would be more change, maybe political change, maybe cultural change that would have come out of that. I think what a trip to Israel does for me, and what it would do for anybody who visits, is at least gives you some sense of the scale, the majesty, the weather, topography. It makes your Bible come alive. You won't be the same again.
Yeah, amen, brother, amen. Well, I want to thank Jeff for sharing his view of one of the most misinterpreted and yet controversial countries in the world. If you have a question or comment for Jeff or me, please feel free to use the comment box at joewatkins.org. We'd love to hear from you. Remember, whether you've been to Israel or not, our faith in the existence and reality of a God who knows your name doesn't depend on a trip to the sites we've read about in the Bible. He cares about you. He loves you. He wants to give you purpose and meaning in your life. You can trust him. From America's first capital, Philadelphia, I'm Joe Watkins. Thanks so much for watching. God willing, I'll see you next week. That was fascinating. There's so many questions, even still.
We scratched the surface.
Yeah,
Really
about the trip and about Israel and about the people.
Joe Watkins' State of Independence is a production of Lighthouse TV, positively different. Made possible in part because of the support of viewers like you.